right, this is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3. Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for good programming. I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Is it actually that there is less bad stuff happening today? Or as I look at what's happening today, have I just reached a level of apathy? I don't know. There's some bad stuff happening today, but we've seen worse, and undoubtedly we will see worse again. So as of midnight tonight, Donald Trump's raising the tariffs on China to 104%. 104%. Doubling, more than doubling the cost of whatever it is. A lot of us are going to learn the hard way that stuff we've been used to buying at some point comes from China. And I'm not just talking about if you go to those websites, Shine or Temu, which I don't use. Sometimes on Instagram, you'll see pretty clothes. But if you click Shop Now, you'll realize that it's all stuff from China. And they invent all these different names of companies. But if you look through the website that the link clicks to, you usually find grammatical errors, or you find strange information when it comes to shipping. Like, oh, yeah, you'll get this in a month or a month and a half. Well, what? But I think over and above that kind of clothing that is obviously from China, my guess is that there's a lot of stuff in our lives. Or even worse, something that appears to be assembled in the United States, so we think it's American made, but it's assembled with foreign parts. Man, that's a lesson I learned when I went car shopping the end of February. Because I'm one of those people who, like, you know, that put that big sticker in the window that has everything you ever wanted to know about the car. These days, a lot of those stickers will tell you where the car was assembled and where the parts come from. And it is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. I looked at was it the Chevy I looked at? And listed under where it was assembled and where the parts came from, there were a total of at least 5 different countries. U.S., Canada, Mexico. I think it said Hungary, for God's sake. And there were, you know, countries that you don't think, oh, yeah, they're going to be making part of my car. No. We have no idea where our stuff comes from. And even if you think you know where your stuff is coming from, do you know where all the parts inside your stuff are coming from? I bet you don't. Well, we're going to learn the hard way. You go back to the store, let's say, in the next few weeks, and you find that whatever it is you're used to buying now costs twice as much. Yeah. I read an estimate that said new cars you can expect to pay anywhere from $2,000 to $20,000 more per car. I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of winning. I am so exhausted from all the winning. I think I would like to maybe lose for a while. And I don't know. You know, we're used to believing information that comes to us from the White House. We've been sort of conditioned. But do you really believe that every single country we've put tariffs on is now calling the White House morning, noon, and night because they want to negotiate, because they want to know what they can do for us to get their tariff lifted? Remember, that's what he did in his first administration. He put tariffs out there much lower than he's doing now, but he put tariffs out there. And then when they were a disaster and he went to lift them, he claimed that he had gotten concessions from all the countries where he lifted the tariffs. Yeah, I lifted the tariffs because they're going to do this for us. And see how big and strong I am? I didn't really care about the tariffs. I just wanted to get a better deal for America. That's what he's going to do again. No matter how meaningless it is, that is what he's going to do again. Because if the country gives him a weird concession, when he was battling about the border with Mexico, remember, the president of Mexico agreed to move, I think it was 10,000 Mexican troops, soldiers, to the border. And so he backed away from that conflict, saying, look at the concession I got. And then it was reported that Mexico already had 10,000 military police officers at the border. He didn't know. So when the president of Mexico said, I'll do this for you, he was like, great. And he backed away and he claimed victory, not realizing that she promised what they were already doing, because he is a genius. He's an absolute genius. And that's what's going to happen again. On the cover, the homepage of the Wall Street Journal, yes, the stock market is volatile, as they say. Here's what I think. There's a basic lack of faith in how the stocks are going to play out long term. But there's a number of people who think they're smarter than the market. Ooh, I'm going to buy when it's real low, and then when it pops up, I'm going to sell it. That's market volatility. People are churning. Everybody thinks they're brilliant. Everybody thinks that they're going to buy into something when it really tanks. And then there's enough people that do that. It rises a little bit, and then they all go out. They all sell, having made a small profit, and then it tanks again. Up and down, up and down. So what he's going to do with the tariffs is he's going to have to start backing away. Because on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, CEOs break silence on Trump trade war. For weeks, business leaders have avoided voicing concerns about tariffs. Some executives are getting more vocal. Those are the folks he doesn't want to lose. His bromance, his best buddy, Elon Musk, of course, wouldn't go after Trump. Not when he's still trying to hang on to his role as shadow president. He's not going to go after Trump. So who does he go after? Trump's trade guy, Peter Navarro. Yeah. Peter Navarro doesn't know what he's doing. It's all him. It's not my bromance Donald. It's all this Peter guy. He's not doing a good job. He doesn't know what he's doing. Except that all he's doing is what Trump tells him to do. So even Trump's love, the biggest love in his life right now. I'm sorry, Ivanka, you've been replaced. The biggest love in Trump's life right now is still Elon Musk, and Elon is taking sideways swipes at him. On, I think it was Jen Psaki's show last night, they put together a bunch of clips, not from Democratic legislators, but from local news. Yeah, it was Jen Psaki. Local news reports across the country on what people like you and me are hearing from our favorite local anchors about this whole tariff mess. Yep, listen to this.
The tariff roller coaster is especially challenging for small businesses.
Clothing retailers and local businesses expect to be impacted.
They know that tariffs will eventually impact their bottom line.
They're already feeling the financial pain from these tariffs.
For a specialty store, it's going to be harder for us to get these unique and interesting products because our suppliers just aren't carrying them anymore.
With the amount of product that we import, it would probably cost us $50,000 to $100,000 additional per year. That's not just something that a small business can necessarily just absorb.
This tin, my distributor already did a preemptive price raise of 7%. So I'm concerned about what a 25% tariff will do.
Now a T-shirt that, it used to be maybe $10 to make is now $15, $20 to make.
I've already seen a rise in some of those products in preparation of the tariffs hitting sooner than later.
Adding these tariffs on top of things and making it a little bit more expensive to buy, that's definitely not what we want.
That's what local news outlets are telling their folks. It isn't just the senators and the Congress people and the business people complaining, and the Elon Musk people complaining about tariffs. It is local news reporting on something that Donald Trump refuses to acknowledge, that tariffs are a tax on us. We pay the tariffs. If a Chinese part doubles in price, the company that needs that part to make their widget, they're not going to absorb that cost. They're going to add that cost to the widget. The widget will become more expensive. Elizabeth Warren joined Jen Psaki last night, and she was talking about tariffs and things that can be done or were done in the Senate. The Senate, you'll recall, tried to get rid of the policy statement, the program, the loophole. Let's call it a loophole. The loophole that allowed Donald Trump to impose tariffs because, I know not a lot of us didn't really get civics when we were growing up. Tariffs are supposed to be imposed by Congress. It is the legislative branch that imposes tariffs, not the executive branch. But there was a loophole that Donald Trump exploited, and the Senate tried to close it, to their credit. Remember, that was when Mike Johnson knew that he was going to lose a vote. If that measure to close that loophole came to Congress, Mike Johnson believed that he was going to lose enough Republicans to the Democrats that they were going to pass it as well. So Mike Johnson used a procedural move to declare that the rest of time Congress is in session is one long day. So they can't bring it to a vote. They don't have the time. They don't have the days necessary to take the proper steps to bring it to a vote. But the Senate did. Elizabeth Warren was talking to Jen Psaki about that. Listen to this.
I get the same question that you probably get times a zillion, which is, well, what happens now? And in preparation for today, I read all the things that Senator Warren has said because I think it's so helpful to understand. So where things sit right now, and I did a little bit of this in my introduction here, is there are 7 Republicans in the Senate who are supporting a bill here that could potentially put a stop. Trump has issued a veto threat. You need way more than 7 votes. But you've also kind of said that, tell me if I'm correct here, that Congress already has the authority to stop him. So what does that mean, and what could happen in order to stop this?
Okay, so understand, remember, we'll do a little constitutional law. It's Congress that actually has to approve tariffs. But we gave this emergency power to Donald Trump But Congress has the power under just a resolution, simple majority, to say it's not an emergency, fella, and that takes away his power to put all of these tariffs in place. Last Wednesday, we advanced in the United States Senate this motion to say, hey, we're not in an emergency situation with Canada. And 4 Republicans right then crossed over, voted with the Democrats, and it passed. And the importance of this, just to be wonky for a minute.
We love wonky. Safe place.
It's a privileged motion, which means it has to be brought to the floor to be voted on. So right now, we've got every Democrat lined up saying we are ready to declare we are not in an emergency. We are not at war with France, with Canada, with Italy. Can we just go through the whole list with Japan, with South Korea? We are not. And if a handful of Republicans will join us, we have the power to put a stop to this tariff catastrophe that Donald Trump is putting in place and pulling our economy into a ditch.
We're in a ditch. I didn't pull any sound from it, but Rahm Emanuel was on with Jon Stewart, and he said, one of the statements that stood out to me, he said, in 8 weeks, Donald Trump has put us in a place with the rest of the world that it will take more than 80 years for us to make up the difference, to regain their respect and their trust. He said, we are no longer credible. And he said, that is going to outlast Trump. The Republican senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, who is generally one of the more, well, let's see, what's a good way to put this? Wackadoodle. He's generally one of the more wackadoodle legislators in the Senate. Earlier, he had this to say about Mr. Trump's tariffs. Listen to this.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hott Smolley put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
And that, my friends, right there, you heard him talking about what is finally going to make Republicans in elected office start publicly pushing back. They're already privately pushing back, not that that makes front page news. They are very worried about the midterms. I read a quote from some expert that said, oh, well, you know, if the midterms were today, we'd get decimated, but it's another year off, and people have short memories. Nobody's going to remember the horrible times we're going through right now. Except there's no sign that the horrible times are going to stop, for God's sake. And they're starting to get scared. Most of this time around, there are more Republican senators who have to defend their seats than there are Democrats, a significantly larger number of Republicans. They come from very red places, so will we make inroads? That is the really big question that people are trying to answer. And as far as Congress, I will be shocked if Democrats don't take a majority in the House of Representatives. Look at all those protests, even protests in little red towns had hands-off protests. Republicans ignore this movement at their peril. How often has the Speaker of the House told the members, oh, by the way, don't hold any town halls because the clips that are being played, you know, on television really make us look bad. So just don't do it, okay? Don't do it. They're scared. They were afraid of Trump's anger and Musk's money. They've now seen in Wisconsin where Musk's money did not carry the day. Musk was the single biggest donor to the Supreme Court race. And if you look at donations, the top 4 donors to the Supreme Court race were all Republicans. The U lines were in there. Tons of money went behind Brad Schimmel. And he didn't just lose, he got creamed. What would you take away if you were a Republican going to have to defend your seat just next year? What would you take away from that? I think they're starting to poop their pants. I think they're getting very scared. And they should be getting very scared. There is other stuff going on. Now that I've spent so much time talking about tariffs, I don't have a huge amount of time to get to it. But the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi has become more corrupt than it was under Bill Barr. Did you see where Pam Bondi was supposed to be sitting for a 60 Minutes interview? And she was asked, those the Venezuelan migrants that were sent to El Salvador, our reporting, our investigation shows that none of them had criminal records. Is that true? And she said, well, those were Venezuelan illegal aliens, and that's why they were sent to El Salvador. And the reporter said, but did they have criminal records? Did any one of them have a criminal record? And Pam Bondi got up and walked out. Fine people, the best people, nothing but the best people. There was that woman. Oh, shoot. Do I have time for this? I'll talk real quick. There was that woman who lost her job. She was in charge of a ruling on who gets their guns back, and she ruled that Mel Gibson would not be allowed to have his guns back. And she told people at the time, she goes, this might be the thing that gets me fired. And it did. Mel Gibson, publicly acknowledged alcoholic, convicted abuser. She lost her job because she didn't approve him getting his gun back. Dick Durbin, in a hearing, was talking to her. Listen to this.
My question to you as a pardon attorney at the time, were you consulted on the pardons of the January 6 rioters?
I was not consulted. No member of my office was consulted about those pardons.
What would have happened to the pardon request for January 6 offenders had the normal DOJ pardon process been followed?
Had any of those individuals applied for a pardon, they would have been in due course fully vetted on an individualized basis, and the office would have formed a recommendation about the individual applicants, which would have been provided to the president. The role is to ensure that people who are waiting their turn, who have meritorious cases, that those cases can make their way to the president's desk. Those folks who have access to the White House through the front door, they don't need the help of the Office of the Pardon Attorney to elevate their cause. And there are thousands of ordinary Americans who are seeking the mercy of the president through the clemency process who are not being considered right now because the office is not being consulted.
The best people. The best people. I'm sorry, did I say that already? The best people. He doesn't have the best people. I have the best people. We're going to start talking to them right after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
We have the phone and text lines open, 773-763-9278. If you've never called in, 773-763-WCPT, a real easy way to remember it. So let's get to the phone lines right now. Our good friend Jim from Chicago is on the line. Hello, Jim. How are you?
Hi, Joan. I'm imagining I was whisked away to a Republican gulag. You name the country. But the conditions are, to see my attorney, I have to watch reruns of The Apprentice, even the outtakes of The Apprentice, and comment on the stagecraft of it to Pam Bondi, of all people. And then maybe I'll get to see whatever country I'm in, get to see one of their top-notch lawyers. But, this is stagecraft, Joan, the worst kind. I mean, Trump, the Senate, the Senate gets a little wonky, but the House and this cabinet are like scenes out of The Apprentice. I mean, if he doesn't like your demeanor, your aspect of your face, whatever the case may be, you're fired. You're fired.
Yep.
And it's like watching it. Honest to goodness, Joan, I couldn't watch a program of that. I mean, I would have to be in the hospital, as I said before, on Demerol, like after an operation or something. And then I would call for a nurse to have it turned off. The whole thing is stagecraft. I mean, he comes out, and now some of these terrorists, I think, are completely for attention. And the way they film him, he comes in, he peeks his head out of the door at Air Force One, or the other day, the two are dressed like the Bobbsey twins. The Israeli prime minister and Trump yesterday, they're dressed identically the same. I mean, you can't. That isn't just luck. And then it was the same kind of a cabinet scene that was with the president of Ukraine. And I mean, you can see it's just a staged, choreographed scene.
The one thing you can't say Donald Trump doesn't know how to use television. He absolutely, and he knows how to play the media like it's a guitar.
Right. Well, that's how he made his career. Barbara Walters picked him out of obscurity in New York. I remember in the 70s putting him on as some real estate mogul, and then he would demand publicity no matter how he got it. It was bad or good or whatever the case may be. But look at Peter Navarro. Now, here's a guy, an aging felon who's going to explain to us why these tariffs are a good thing for America. Didn't he go to jail for lying? Didn't he get 6 months in jail for lying? I remember Peter Navarro went to jail. I know
Yes, he did. I believe, didn't he lie to the FBI? Wasn't that what he did? I don't know. I get so confused. There are so many criminals in the Trump administration. It's really hard. Like, Steve Bannon. Let's see. He went for he was fraud, right? Fraud, lying, one of the above, all of the above.
And he was supposed to be sentenced in December, and that just went away like a cloud.
Oh, that was his second one. Remember, he went to jail for the first conviction, Bannon did, but then in the second trial, he agreed to a plea deal that involved no jail time, I think, because they knew at this point in time there was no point in trying to put him back in the pokey. They knew Trump would spring him.
He'd spring him, exactly. You took the words out of my mouth, Joe. But anyway, I was heartened by the worldwide response to this. And then when you hear professors from NIU and these terrific universities and universities all over the country saying, why don't we fight back? We've got large amounts of money to fight back. Why are we letting them arrest people in the night and intimidate people for this or that or whatever the case may be? I mean, this is in America, and we can't live like this. But anyway, Joan, thanks for taking my call, and have a good
Thanks
show.
For calling, Jim. Always appreciate it. Let's go to our other good friend, Dave from Hoffman Estates. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Joan. The other day I was just reading about where
Pete Hegseth. He's having books on the Holocaust, histories of feminism, civil rights, and racism, and Maya Angelou's famous autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, were among the nearly 400 volumes removed from the U.S. Naval Academy's library this week after Hegseth ordered the school to get rid of them because they promote DEI.
Oh, God.
And I just read, too, where Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield has been fired in what appears to be a growing purge of top-ranking military officials by the Trump administration. She was a helicopter pilot, just like, our Senator Tammy Duckworth was a helicopter pilot, too. And
doesn't it seem to you that we're purging more blacks and women from the military ranks than we are purging white guys? I don't know. Call me crazy.
They've been definitely going after, a lot of the women, the high-ranking women, and like you say, the blacks and she was the first woman to be president of the Naval War College, and been serving as a senior official at NATO, and was one of a handful of women who occupied the highest ranks of the Navy. Just kind of the coattail of what we were just talking about, and like last week, I believe there was last week or the other week, there was a female, captain or admiral that commanded a ship or something. They fired her, and then this Air Force guy that, the cyber?
Oh, yeah. In the past, the head of Cyber Command has also had a national security post. The two were combined. And Trump got rid of that Hout, I think his name is, and wants to split the jobs in two. And the thinking is that he wants to do that because the head of Cyber Command, because that's part of the military, that has to be a military person. But the security part of it, the intelligence part of it, that can be a civilian. And the thinking is that Trump wants to get one of his toadies in there. And that's why he had to fire this guy. And then he's going to these two jobs have always been together. But Trump wants to split them apart so he can get another Trump loyalist in a position of power.
Hey, Joan, you think this Cyber Command guy, too, could have been able to crack that, that thing what Hegseth and them guys just did?
There's Signalgate? You mean, could they have?
Yes, thank you.
Well, Malcolm Nance, who is on Stephanie's show a lot, said that there's no question. I mean, that's a commercially available app. He said, there's no question that people are going to, foreign governments and adversaries are going to try to get into those kinds of programs. And he said, I have no doubt that we do the same thing to them. Only I would imagine they're smarter and they actually use government encrypted channels, but hey, who knows?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, that this guy, with cyber, and he'd know. I don't know. Once it goes in the airwaves, it kind of fizzes itself. But the sending units on each one, I think maybe he knows how to, get the information yet than that. But you think now with these tariffs and stuff like that, and Trump, shaking up all these other countries and that. And all these people possibly, they're claiming, calling in, wanting to make a deal with them and that, but who knows? But you think this really blows up his ego, making him think that he's like king of the world now?
Well, I think that's what the tariffs are about. He makes him feel like he's a tough guy. I'm going to put a tariff on you. You're going to have to make a deal with me to get rid of it. Yeah. I mean, it's like he's like a criminal boss.
Yeah, exactly. He's a Don, definitely a Don. But it just like the way the market went today was up, pretty good at the beginning and that. But now, what do you think tomorrow after these oligarchs and whatever get their money? It's going to sink down again?
Oh God, yes, yeah. Like I said, I think there are a few people who think they're really smart, and when there's volatility, when things are going up and down, You try to buy low, and then when it pops up, you sell it, and then it drops down again. And if you like, you buy it again, and then you wait for it to pop up, and you sell it. It's a kind of a labor-intensive way to make money.
On the margin or something? Something about buying on the margin.
That's too. That's too.
I know, me too.
That's too businessy for me. I know buy and sell, and that's about it.
That's about it. Clearly, with this one, the other day too, they were talking about where a lot of these foreign students and some of the professors and that are shying away from coming to the States. And because they're going to get deported or whatever, and
I went to that Tom Skilling thing about climate change. Tom Skilling and Don Wubbles, the chancellor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, was the moderator, and she said European universities are salivating right now because they are convinced they are going to be able to pick off the best and the brightest. Timothy Snyder, who wrote those wonderful books on authoritarianism. He's written several of them. On Tyranny is his most famous. He and two other Yale professors, one Snyder's wife and another guy who his wife is a historian, and the other guy also published on authoritarianism. But they all are U.S. Canada dual citizens. They're all going to Canada. They are leaving Yale, and they are going to Canada to teach there.
Yeah, so I heard that these young people that are of college, coming to college age, ain't coming to the States for that reason, too. But how are the colleges going to justify boosting up the rates if they can't get these out of state rates or whatever? But anyway, let me clear off. Others have been waiting on, too. So thank you, Joan.
Thank you. I've gotten a couple of interesting texts. Lois from Elgin. Joan, we get a lot of pharmaceuticals from China, FYI, and she sent me a link to an article from The Hill that says exactly that. Chinese imports account for a significant portion of U.S. prescriptions and over-the-counter drugs. Many of the Chinese-produced drugs are generics, which account for 91% of prescriptions dispensed in the United States. The president and CEO of the Association for Accessible Medicines said the Chinese market is a key supplier for key starting materials and active ingredients to the generic supply chain. And when this was pointed out to the White House, they reiterated their stance that there were going to be no exceptions. No exceptions. So there we go. Jay from Skokie also texted in, Beijing is now the second largest foreign holder of U.S. debt with a claim of around $816 billion. I'd always read that previous administrations had to walk very carefully in their relationships with China because China does buy up U.S. debt. And what's going to happen if they decide that $800+ billion of debt needs to be called and goes to the people and says, you know what, we've decided we're not going to carry this debt anymore. You need to pay it by this date, and you need to pay it in full. But midnight tonight, tariffs against China go up to 104% because China will not capitulate to Donald Trump's demands, at least not as of yet. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more texts and calls right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I just want you to know, I don't know how you are going to get through the rest of Trump's term, but I now have options. I got a text from Luke. Just wanted to write and say I really enjoy listening to your show. Am currently living and working in Costa Rica. Thanks again. Keep up the good work, from Luke. And I responded, Luke, do you have a guest room? I'm waiting for Luke's response. So I suppose I could broadcast from Costa Rica. Take my little portable equipment on the road. Costa Rica, by the way, I was there once, and it is beautiful. It is lovely. Just lovely there. So I will let you know if Luke gets back to me on this. While I'm waiting for Luke's response, let's go back to the phone lines. Ron is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Ron.
How you doing? Yes, in the past week, the stock market has already lost over $10 trillion. So what's going to happen when the tariffs come into effect tonight? I don't know.
That's one of the things Rahm Emanuel was talking about when he was on The Daily Show. He said it's been 11 weeks. They've lost $11 trillion. Can you imagine what it's going to be like when it's at 200 weeks?
Let's see. And Trump said yesterday that we have a national debt of $36 trillion because of tariffs. It's because of the corporate tax rate is nothing, and the millionaires and billionaires, they don't pay anything either. So that's why it's continually going up.
Yeah, we have such incredible income inequality right now in this country that, we're lucky there isn't just rioting in the streets. And, you can understand why somebody who feels that they and their kids really have no shot at the American dream, you can understand why somebody like that is angry. But this whole, we're voting for Trump because we want to burn it all down, kids, I don't think that was the right response. I don't think that's going to get you where you think you want to go. I really don't.
Yeah. And also, there were more than 5 million protesters over the weekend, and Trump said they were all paid actors.
Did you see Eric Zorn in today's Picayune Sentinel? He's like, where's my check? I don't get it. I was there. Where's my check? I protested. Where do I go to get that payment?
Oh, was that hit on TV? I know there was somebody on TV who said that. That's probably him.
Did they? Did they say it too? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's go to Dan, who is on the line from Indiana. Hello, Dan.
Hello, Joan. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Thank you for calling.
Listen to you and Tom Hartman every day, and I am so grateful you guys are there, if you want to know the truth. My question, the impending abyss that we're entering, I'm wondering about exactly when we can expect martial law. And then we also, as you probably know, announced today that he's going to have a parade and a national holiday for his birthday. A parade, of course, with tanks and missiles.
Please don't tell me that.
Oh, yes. Look it up. And they're working on it right now. Yeah. He wanted it last time. And he had people around him said, we can't do it. It'll tear up the pavement, and it will cost $100 million. Well, anyway, it'll happen this time because he's got everybody with him now this time. But besides that, having a Kim Jong-un type parade, I'm wondering when your opinion is, and it's coming as far as the Martial Law Insurrection Act, how this will affect everything. I'm not quite sure. My wife and I are thinking of selling the house and leaving the country. And I'm not quite sure the timing, but I would like to know your thoughts.
Well, what you're afraid of is something I'm afraid of, too. And I don't think he would ever use the military against Canada, but I am concerned that he might think that he can take military action against Greenland because it's so sparsely populated, and Denmark, whose territory it is so far away. I also believe, and that's why I think it's really important that when we did the hands-off protest on the 5th, and then there's another big protest nationally planned for the 19th, I think we have to be very, very, very careful to be nonviolent, because I think that is a very real scenario you just described, Dan. This is a guy who doesn't like anybody who opposes him. He doesn't like anybody who says anything that might be construed as negative against him. He has a long memory. He has a grudge. And I think if there was a huge protest, and God forbid it became violent, I don't think he would hesitate for a second to bring the military in. I think he's looking.
That's my thought.
I agree with you. I agree with you. It's very frightening.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, what does that mean? What does that mean when that happens?
What does it mean? Well, you know, a lot of people who have time to protest are those of us who are past a certain age. And I just would like to believe that the American military is not going to fire on a bunch of old men and old women, but I may find out the hard way, Dan. I may find out the hard way.
That's my thought also. My entire family is a military family. My dad was shot down twice over Europe. My one uncle died fighting the Nazis, and it keeps me awake at night, is all I can say. My wife and I are both in our 70s, worked all our life worrying about Social Security, and
Didn't think we were going to get old to this, did we, Dan?
Well, no. No, it is so unbelievable that it just, well, that's all I can say is it's unbelievable where we're at.
Well,
but
try to find something that makes you happy. Go ahead. What'd you tell your son?
Yeah, like I told my son, he's flying to Florida to help his quadriplegic cousin here tomorrow. And I told him, I said, if this happens, you know, they're talking about the 20th, Hitler's birthday, actually. I mean, but that's a Sunday, so he'll be playing golf. So I suppose it'll be after that. And I'm just wondering, how does that, I've looked it up. I mean, as far as when he does martial law, it stops everything, correct? As far as flights, everything is under control of the military.
I believe you are correct, though I should probably book an expert on the show to explain it to us. Dan, I've got to go. I want to get one more call in. Thank you for the call.
Thank you so much, Joan.
Let's go to Earl, who's on the line from Hyde Park. Hey, Earl.
Hey, Joan. Thank you for taking my call. And what I quickly wanted to add to the conversation is I'm also concerned about America having a short memory. I don't necessarily believe, like we saw in Florida, where those two elections just went down, the Republicans were elected, even though the margins were cut in half from what Trump had done in those districts. But ruby red states where the senators may be, you know, running up for election, they may be able to hold on to their seats if we can't find somebody that's charismatic enough, has enough money to negotiate their district and try to put shoe leather to the ground and meet the people and convince them to vote Democratic. I mean, there's a whole lot of muscle memory in the red states, and it's not logical because they've been, let's say, brainwashed for maybe 60 to maybe 70 years, well, ever since Goldwater. People like to say Ronald Reagan, but no, they started brainwashing the Republican Party long before then. And I'm not necessarily convinced that we should celebrate right now until after the elections and we see the results in those midterm elections. Although I'm optimistic to a point, but I'm not, let's say, blind to our history and the fact that in these
and that's where we need to be, Earl. Optimistic but not blind. Thank you so much for the call. We've got to get to the news. We are going to be back with some of the best people who we have on the show today. And I just want you to know I still have not gotten a reply from Luke about that guest room in Costa Rica, so I may be here a little while longer. We'll be right back after the news.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You know, I was talking about Malcolm Nance earlier in the show. He has a Substack, which is pretty interesting to read. And he is of the opinion that Donald Trump is planning some kind of military action, possibly, or maybe even probably, against Iran. And he believes that because through publicly available information, not any secrets anybody's letting out, it appears we have a military accumulation going on in the waters off the Mideast. And he is very curious about why that would be happening unless there is some sort of plan to use the military somewhere, sometime. Donald Trump yesterday said that he was in, or his administration was in, certainly not him, his administration was in direct face-to-face talks with Iran about their nuclear program and other things. What's going on? Well, let's talk to somebody who knows this region better than any of us. Behnam Ben Taleblu is the senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and is an expert on what is going on in this part of the country. Behnam, welcome back. Thank you for being here again.
It's always a pleasure and great to be back with you.
Thank you. As you can tell, because I book you and reach out to you all the time to be here, I really enjoy these conversations as well. What can you tell us about what is going on with the United States and Iran right now?
Well, there is quite a bit going on between the United States and Iran right now, but really all eyes are on time and place. Time, Saturday, place, the Sultanate of Oman, the place where even dating back to the Clinton and Bush administrations has been a mediator for much, if not all, of various shades of the U.S.-Iran conflict, whether it's hostages, hikers, backpackers, sanctions relief, indirect nuclear deals, direct nuclear deals, hostage diplomacy, you name it, Oman has been mediating it. The real debate now is the bombshell dropped by President Trump just yesterday, late in the afternoon after Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel was visiting the U.S., was visiting Trump in Washington, D.C., and President Trump said that actually there were going to be direct and high-level negotiations with the Iranians. This follows, of course, a letter that he had written to the Islamic Republic in early March, basically inviting the Iranians for talks, but also dangling the military option in front of them. And this is stuff that he has not really kept private because he was the one himself who told a Fox interviewer that he had sent this letter. You know, some of the past U.S.-Iran letter diplomacy used to be secret until the media years later would find out, or there would be a leak, or there would be some FOIA request. But the president himself likes publicity and indeed did mention the letter, and indeed he broke news yesterday that there would be these direct talks on Saturday. Iranian press and Iranian officials were slow to respond, but just today you have Iran's foreign minister writing in the Washington Post that they have accepted these talks, but they are in fact indirect talks, essentially mediated by the Omanis. Now you have just recently news from about an hour or 2 hours ago from the State Department spokesperson essentially saying that these are not necessarily even talks, they're more of a meeting. One wonders how you have a direct versus indirect meeting, but all of this is to say, and actually that all of this is to say that, you know, as good analysts, as good Iran watchers, as good consumers of political and policy news. We should not be shocked that the president, despite all the military maneuvering in the region, is seeking a diplomatic option here. And this may sound strange to some ears, but if you go even back to the campaign period, not term 2, but term 1, the campaign period, 2015, 2016, Trump distinguished himself from a whole host of fairly hawkish Republican candidates who said that they would tear up the Obama-era nuclear deal on day one by saying, quote, I buy bad deals, I make them good deals. And that attempts to leave the Obama-era deal and then get a better deal, which he failed to do, but he created this sanctions architecture called the maximum pressure policy, and now he's brought back that sanctions architecture. And if I had to say what is going through the administration's mind, or what is the zeitgeist is, I think the administration is trying to free ride off of Israel's military successes in the Middle East over the past year and a half against the Iranian terror network, to essentially say that the regime has to negotiate over its nuclear program, and if not, kind of dangle the military option. So there is the state of play. Certainly the Iranians debate these points, but nonetheless, they are going to allegedly, in some format, be engaging the Trump administration for the first time, which is something that they fought tooth and nail not to do back in term 1. And I'll just end with this quote, which is, despite Iran's supreme leader, and that's a title meant to be taken very literally, meeting with the Emir of Qatar a few weeks back saying, all U.S. presidents, all American presidents are the same, Donald Trump is very different for the Islamic Republic of Iran, not just because he's different stylistically and substantively for Americans, be it on things like tariffs or trade or the environment or what have you, or alliances, but because he did three things. One, he killed Iran's chief terrorist, Qasem Soleimani, when the Obama and Bush administration were not going to pull that trigger. Two, he actually broke the taboo about supporting Iranian protesters and the Iranian people when the norm and the conventional thinking in Washington was actually that if you support Iranian protesters, it delegitimizes them, it's the kiss of death. And three, he proved that U.S. unilateral sanctions can pack a punch, because he did, in a year and a half, more macroeconomic damage to the Iranian economy than a decade plus of multilateral sanctions. And for those three reasons, the various governments in Iran have avoided negotiating with Trump, and that's why they're insisting on indirect. And you don't take it from me, take it from the supreme leader of Iran, who told you how tough it was to actually even negotiate with Trump because of who Trump is in the zeitgeist of this regime. They say that, quote, the shoe of Qasem Soleimani, that chief terrorist, the shoe of Qasem Soleimani has more honor than the head of the man who killed Soleimani. And so that's how they frame the president. So this is deeply personal for the regime.
Okay. Indirect versus direct talks. You've got a representative from the United States, a representative from Iran. There's a little table between them, and they're talking. Indirect talks, you said the Omanis would be involved. Does that mean that the United States talks to a representative from Oman and says, well, we'd like A, B, and C, and then the Omani leaves that room, runs down the hall, goes and sits with the people from Iran and says, well, they'd like A, B, and C. What do you think of that? I know that's a silly example, but is that how it works?
No, bless you, because you hit the nail on the head. And it's not the first time. If you remember when the Biden administration was trying to resurrect the 2015 nuclear deal back in 2021, it began indirect nuclear diplomacy in various European capitals, basically relying on the Europeans, who in some way relied on the Russians, to mediate in a whole series of rooms between two totally separate rooms, which was one room was the Americans and one room was the Iranians. So that which you described is actually, if indirect is going to be key and it's going to be negotiations rather than a meeting, that which you described is very, very accurate, is very historically rooted. It's, again, comical, but that's how it's been done before. And again, I think there's also a precedent from back in the day, perhaps late Bush administration, early Obama administration with Iraq as well, where it wasn't a room, but it was a super, super long hallway where the Americans on one side and the Iranians on another side.
Okay, now explain to me the difference between negotiations and meetings. Well, it's instead of we want A, B, and C, it's like, well, you know, how you feeling today? What is the difference? Why is that terminology important to them that they had to come out and say, maybe not negotiations, but meetings?
You know, the how you doing today, if only things in the U.S.-Iran relationship, particularly over the past 46 years, were as kaleidoscopic as a Seinfeld episode, then maybe the world would be a slightly more peaceful place. But I think if I had to really guess here, and we're all doing guesstimation as much as analysis, the reason for the potential backpedaling and the reframing, at least via the State Department, which is supposed to be, by the way, the diplomatic arm of the U.S. government, is because if you have a negotiation, well, there's an issue that you have, there's positions, and the positions improve or get worse over time. And then there's leverage at the negotiating table, and there's leverage, you know, facts on the ground, and the exit option for negotiations. If you're having a meeting, if you want to spin it positively, one might guess that the U.S. would share its position and say, take it or leave it, or here's what we want from you, or perhaps even if they're being more nice, provide a roadmap, here's what we'd like to see. It's basically to convey an even more serious message. So who knows exactly what the contours of the written message sent back in March contained, but allegedly a lot of it was nuclear, but apparently some of it was regional as well. And, of course, it was the invitation to negotiations backstopped by that potential threat of military force. But a meeting could mean less of an exchange and more of just, here's the offer, think it through. And one reason why that might be or might comport more with the Trump style this go around is because when the president said that, you know, he had sent that letter, he had said that there was a 2-month window to respond. So who knows if they're trying to make good on their ultimatum here. But if I had to put the pieces of the puzzle together, that's what it's looking like.
Interesting. I'm speaking to Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about an article that you recently co-authored on whether or not this diplomatic movement from Tehran is maybe trying to buy them more time to work on their nuclear program. We will be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Behnam Ben Taleblu is a senior director of the Iran program and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and recently co-authored an article on Tehran and diplomacy and the nuclear program they're trying to advance. If you would, talk about that with my listeners.
Sure. So the Islamic Republic of Iran is looking to run the clock here. 2025 really is, as you might take or borrow from Persian, a destiny-creating year. That's a phrase. Saz Sarnavish Saz, a destiny-creating year. It has that nice alliteration in Persian. And that's not just because of the economic weakness at home. That's not just because of the social unrest at home. That's not just because of the neutered proxy network at home. It's because of the nuclear escalation, which is high and historic. And it's also because it might be the last year, potentially, for a diplomatic option that involves the framework that we've all been living with on the Iran nuclear file since 2006. And that's a international P5+1, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany framework that actually, believe it or not, the Bush administration started in 2006 on Iran and was inherited and kept by Obama, inherited and kept by Trump, inherited and kept by Biden, and potentially now about to be junked or switched by the Trump administration in term 2.0. And we warned in that article that that Tehran is looking to tempt Trump, who styles himself as a deal maker and has written a book called The Art of the Deal, with talks to potentially run the clock against these more historical forces that are taking time away from the regime side and try to find a way to put time on their side. And one thing to notice, or one thing to pay attention to here, is that the regime, by engaging in talks in whatever format, direct, indirect, meeting, negotiation, what have you, is trying to use negotiations with America as a human shield with which to prevent a preemptive Israeli military strike against this program. And it's trying to run the clock on this European tough diplomatic option called snapback. Snapback is a thing built into the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, codified by Sanctions Resolution 2231, that basically says October 18, 2025 is the last time members of the deal can restore previous tough multilateral sanctions that had clauses like, hey, Iran, you shouldn't be enriching, or hey, Iran, you shouldn't be testing ballistic missiles, or hey, Iran, you shouldn't be transferring weapons all around the world or importing weapons, as well as sanctions against their nuclear, missile, and military program. So we warn in the piece that Tehran is trying to tempt the Trump administration to run the clock, to advance its nuclear program, and to be able to do so without having either America or Israel put the crunch on it. And so it's really a warning more than anything else.
What will be the consequences if Iran does become a nuclear nation?
Oh my goodness! Well, if the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the regime that rules Iran today, has been in power for 46 years, literally founded itself with America through an act of international hostage-taking. It's a regime that says death to America and means it. It's a regime that says death to Israel and means it. If we fail to take these leaders seriously at their word, we're going to be replicating on a global scale the error that we saw in 2022 vis-a-vis Ukraine, where we put words into Putin's mouth rather than listening to the words coming out of his mouth. And unlike the Russians or some of the other actors that sometimes have hedged or balanced, the Iranians have actually spent capital, spent national reputation, spent money, and spent treasure in defense of their ideological export of their 1979 Islamic Revolution. And having the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism access the world's most dangerous weapons, when already without those weapons, it is doing things that we never even saw in the Cold War. For example, in the Cold War, you never had what happened in 2024. In 2024, Iran, a non-nuclear armed country, not once, not twice, but thrice, directly attacked the territory of a nuclear-armed nation with ballistic missiles. And now in 2025, it has lived to tell the tale. So take all the literature and scholarship and theory on deterrence and throw it out the window, because that is necessary and important, but it is not sufficient to describe the pickle we are in. And just from an emotional perspective, let me say one thing. You know, I'm a proud first-generation American. I'm a first-generation Iranian American. Mom and dad are immigrants to this country many, many years ago, almost 50-plus years now. But I consider myself lucky as an Iranian American when I look at the region, when I look at the Muslim world even, that the Iranian people, however, have so much in common with the West, and in particular with America. And it would be a gross moral or political error for Trump or a Republican or a Democrat or any other U.S. president or politician to turn their back on this increasingly protesting Iranian population. When you look at Iran, it's one of the few places in the world where you can actually have a marriage a few places in the Middle East where you can actually have a marriage of U.S. strategy and U.S. ideology. In the Middle East, those two things, U.S. strategy, U.S. ideology, are often at war. And supporting the Iranian people does not put you in conflict with your strategies, which is counter-proliferation, and your value, which is support of classical liberalism and classical liberal values, which are attacked by anti-American authoritarian regimes like Russia, like China, and their proxies and partners all around the world. So if this regime gets weapons after the world has said all options are on the table for so many years, its authoritarianism, I fear, would be locked in, and then it would turn on that population that has already been turning its guns on and say, the world, Israel, stop me. Who do you think you are? And that is very dangerous, too.
Wow. So it wouldn't just be the rest of the world that suffers. It would be their very own up-and-coming younger generation that suffers.
Yeah, and if only governing elites in Iran actually paid attention to this, because the real shame of that country, when you compare, the past 46 years to present, the value of the rial, that's the Iranian currency, when you compare it on the free market rate, the exchange rate relative to the U.S. dollar at the start of the revolution was 70 rials. A subunit of the rial is a toman, so 7 tomans to $1. Now it's 107,000, or if you look at the actual unit, the rial, it's over 1 million rials to the U.S. dollar today. This is proof that the leaders in Tehran don't care about the national interest, and naturally from that flows not caring about the public good, and naturally from that flows not caring about the people. This is Mugabe-level inflation and stagnation and economic mismanagement by design, because the founding father of the Islamic Republic has a line, has actually 2 lines on the economy that everyone knows. One is, this revolution wasn't about the price of watermelons, and 2, that, economics is for donkeys. Well, this is exactly what happens when that is the framework you bring to the table.
You mentioned Netanyahu earlier in this discussion. With the recent military action undertaken by Israel against Hezbollah and basically directly or indirectly against Iran, I was under the impression that maybe for now Iran was sort of muted or had been isolated. Would you say that's wrong? I gather that's wrong.
Well, I mean, what do you mean by muted or isolated?
Well, it seemed like, they had all this influence in Lebanon, which seems to have gone away. I think that North Korea is now supplying, and China are supplying Putin with most of his stuff. They don't seem to be as big a player, I guess, as they were before Israel took all this military action.
Well, Israel's military action against the Iranian proxy network, which the regime itself calls the, quote, axis of resistance, they started using this this terminology, axis of resistance, to describe the constellation of terror groups and militias that they had turned into a proxy or into a partner of theirs for many years. And in some cases, they created these groups, like Hezbollah way back in the day in Lebanon, or the Badr Corps way back in the day in Iraq, or more recently, they co-opted them, like Hamas in Gaza or the Houthis in Yemen. Either way, this was the tip of the regime's terror spear. And as we saw in the post-9/11 Middle East and the various wars and conflicts in that region, the regime wielded this proxy network to be able to fight a limited war against America, against Israel, and against our Arab partners in the region. But what Israel has done so successfully in the post-October 7 Middle East is to turn the Iranian strategy on its head, which was, for the past 20 years, Iran, through this proxy network, has been fighting a limited war while denying for everyone else the option of a limited war. And it is now Israel has now kind of piecemealed on that, turned that on its head, and with the U.S. preemptive strikes by President Trump in early March against the Houthis, it's trying to get Iran to connect the dots in this way, to say, hey, if I'm losing continuously in the region, it would behoove me to give in earlier rather than to militarily pay a higher cost and lose later. So I wouldn't see it in terms of political influence, because many of these proxies are battered, they're neutered, they're down, but they're not out. Because the regime will always try to find a way. There's a story in the Israeli press today that Iran is trying to find sea routes to the ports which are controlled by Hezbollah in Lebanon to be able to fund Hezbollah. This builds on top of a story we've been seeing for the past few months now, where in the decline of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the regime is trying to get them cash via regular planes and luggage and cargo planes coming through Turkey. So the regime is always going to try to find a way, because these are jurisdictions of weak central authority, because these are borderline states, because there are populations that harbor a grievance that the regime is trying to co-opt and put a gun in the hands of someone who is willing to shoot at someone that the regime itself wants to shoot at. So we're not out of the forest yet. The Israelis have done a very, very significant thing. but they are thus far helping manage the problem rather than solve the problem. To solve the problem, we need to deal with the arsonist rather than the little fires in the region.
Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Likewise, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
Attorney Sabrina Talukder joins me. Sabrina is a lawyer with the Lawyers Committee Senior Counsel at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law. And we are here to talk about a lawsuit against Donald Trump, a lawsuit about DEI against Donald Trump, a lawsuit being brought by Chicago Women in Trade. Sabrina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me about the origins of this lawsuit, who got it together, and what the filing was about.
Absolutely. This lawsuit was filed by Chicago Women in Trades, and we initially filed to stop key parts of the Trump administration's unlawful anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion executive orders from going into effect. And these orders are vague and unconstitutional. And we specifically went into court with Chicago Women in Trades in order to protect their First Amendment rights to free speech because they are being silenced.
And Chicago Women in Trades, Chicago Women in Trade, how many people are in that group? And is it just strictly in the city limits, or does it have members who live in other parts of Illinois?
Chicago Women in Trade has work regarding pre-apprenticeship programs that are for women in Chicago, but their reach is national. They provide trainings, they create mentorship programs all throughout the country. And when you say the name Chicago Women in Trades, unions, industry stakeholders, and tradeswomen across the country know who this organization is because they serve as a beacon for what is possible for women in the skilled trades.
I know that in March, as part of this lawsuit, there was a motion filed for an emergency restraining order to stop parts of what Trump was trying to do against DEI. Where does that stand?
The judge in this case granted the temporary restraining order for Chicago Women in Trades against the Department of Labor. And the scope of the order has three parts. First, the Department of Labor is temporarily enjoined or blocked from canceling or pausing any of the Chicago Women in Trades grants based on a specific termination provision in the executive orders, saying that all equity-related grants must be terminated. Second, the Department of Labor is prevented from requiring any grantee or contractor nationwide from certifying that they do not operate any programs promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. And third, the government cannot initiate any False Claims Act enforcement action against Chicago Women in Trades pursuant to the certification provision.
Do you think, as a lot of people have said, that Trump's war on DEI is really this, some people say MAGA really stands for Make America White Again. Those should be the initials. Is this a war on African-American people, particularly brown people too, I suppose, and women? We're going to throw them in the mix, but mostly African-Americans.
Well, one thing I hope that listeners, can understand is that equity impacts everyone. And Chicago Women in Trades is an organization whose very mission is to expand equitable economic opportunities for women in the skilled trades. And approximately 70% of the women they serve are Black and Latino women. And so when we talk about a war on diversity, equity, inclusion, this is far-reaching. It could be veterans that need suicide prevention counseling. It could be students that need free lunches. It impacts every single American. But of course, there are desperate and disproportional negative impacts on communities of color, given the systemic harm that has occurred in the United States.
Where is this legal action going to go? Is there going to be a hearing? Is this going to work its way up to the Supreme Court? What kind of a path do you see here?
Right now, we are preparing for a motion for a preliminary injunction that will happen on Thursday, and we await the court's decision on that. This would come from the Northern District of Illinois, and then after that, we will go through the appellate process, most likely. And, we'll see what happens from there.
So if it's going to go through the appellate process, then it could potentially be on track to be considered by the Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
Do you have much faith in this Supreme Court? A lot of the people making some of these rulings are people who were appointed to their seats by Trump, which shouldn't make any difference since it's a lifetime commitment, but they certainly seem to be a pretty partisan group. Do you worry about that?
What I worry about is that Chicago Women in Trades will not be able to keep its doors open. Oh. And I worry, to me, that is a story that needs to be told in how an everyday American worker who is just trying to learn skills to have the opportunity to put food on the table, how that story can reach every court in the country. Because Chicago Women in Trades needs legal protection. On Thursday, we're asking for a nationwide injunction. We need that to be in place because an entity like Chicago Women in Trades receives federal funding that's terminated because they are refusing to self-censor all diversity, equity, inclusion language from its materials. No nonprofit in the country should have to go through that, and Chicago Women in Trades just absolutely needs this legal protection. And in terms of my personal faith in the legal system, I believe in the story of Chicago Women in Trades. It's the story of the moment. It's a story of why equity matters to everyone, whether it's a judge or someone listening into this radio station right now.
Wow. I'm glad you have that faith, because sometimes, Sabrina, mine is a little wobbly. Talk about your background. How did you come to this organization, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law? What is it that drew you to this?
Well, I come from a background of defending the rights of individuals who are incarcerated, and I've been lucky enough to also work as a policy director. And I came to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law because I just fundamentally believe that racial justice is a core part of this country. That is what makes America great. And, I'm honored to be at this organization to work alongside Chicago Women in Trades to ensure that nonprofits are not silenced and that they are able to serve their communities and continue to break down structural race and gender-based barriers. And what I really want folks at home to know is that everyday Americans will suffer because nonprofits will not be able to continue doing the work that they do for communities. This means families who will lose a way to put food on the table.
Yeah. Well, that's what people keep trying to report on and get the story out, is these actions, as destructive as they are, there's going to be a domino effect. I mean, it's like, you say, it's, in my hometown, they're closing a factory. 100 people are going to lose their jobs. And isn't that sad? And it is sad. And all of the cafes and restaurants and the dry cleaners that those people spent money at, they're now going to pull that in. I mean, there's talk about these tariffs may affect what kind of entertainment we see, because the tariffs are going to make production and those kinds of costs more. At the same time, if people are worried about losing their jobs or worrying about the price of groceries going up, what are they going to cut? Hey, we don't need this streaming service. Let's cut that. I mean, it's just why it always amazes me when people don't really grasp the interconnectedness of things. You know, you might think, oh, Chicago women in trades, well, you know, that's really, really heartbreaking. That's too bad for them, but it doesn't affect me. But it does, doesn't it, Sabrina?
Absolutely. And the threat of termination of federal funding has ripple effects that extend far beyond Chicago Women in Trade's ability to operate. Their work helps women put food on the table. They engage in anti-harassment trainings that make job sites safer for everyone in the construction industry and the skilled trades. And they help public and private employers recruit high-quality candidates. Right now, Chicago Women in Trades works. They helps fill a worker shortage of approximately 650,000 people that needs to be filled in the skilled trades. And see its equity-driven mission strengthens the economy to the benefits of Americans across the country. And all we are asking is for Chicago Women in Trades to be able to keep their doors open so they continue to do this work that is vital for everyday Americans.
People, we're a big union supporter here at this station, and we do a lot of interviews with various union groups. And when I take calls, I always get calls about, you know, are the trade unions really an option for people of color? Are the trade unions really an option for women? And up until recently, I think, Sabrina, the answer would have been yes. I'm not so sure what the answer is now. What do you think?
I think that the ability of Chicago Women in Trades to be able to continue doing its work will answer that question, because their programming ensures that everyone just has a fair shot of applying for union jobs in the skilled trades. And women, and particularly people of color, experience disproportionately high rates of sexual harassment on skilled trade job sites. And the work that Chicago Women in Trade does is just make these job sites safer for everyone. And so if we want to ensure that the economy is strong and that these vacancies are filled in the skilled trade industry, and to make sure that people are adequately recruited and retained in the skilled trade, we need to make sure that Chicago Women in Trades can continue doing their work, which is all that they are asking.
The people who listen to this radio station are more interested in politics than the average person, and also, I believe, more inclined to be active. Is there anything that the public can do? Are there, I don't know, witness slips? Are there protests? What can people do to be of help to you in this effort?
The most important thing that people can do is support Chicago Women in Trades by however they're able to and think is best.
But how? I don't think that's. It's probably not a group that everybody in our audience is familiar with. How do they support it? What is an action they can take?
I think that you can learn more about their programs, and they have ways of engaging on their website.
And the website is, do you have that handy? Because I don't have it in front of me, I don't think. I should be able to look it up. CWIT.org. CWIT.org is Chicago Women in Trades. And I have, at some of the union-related events where we've done public broadcasts, I've met some of the women in these groups, and they're amazing. They really, truly are inspirational. When you have dealt with the group, is there a person who really stood out or a story that really struck you that you can share with us?
Well, every person that works at Chicago Women in Trades is just a gem and a superstar, because they are so motivated by the communities that they serve. And for me, Jane Valingo, who is the executive director, really represents what Chicago Women in Trades is about. She is someone who cares deeply about the experiences and well-being of people going through these programs. She cares deeply about her staff, and she cares that every American family is able to put food on the table and keep a roof over their head, no matter where they're born and what they look like.
Sabrina Toluchter, it is a pleasure to talk with you. Please continue to fight the good fight and keep us updated on your successes, and I believe there will be successes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Joan, and thank you so much to the listeners at home. We appreciate all of your support.
We are going to take a break. I will be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I have mentioned recently that one of my new favorite elected officials is this guy, Greg Casar. He is a Democrat congressperson out of Austin, Texas. And you know how I love Jasmine Crockett, and we've been thinking about doing Crockett's Corner. And also I've come to love Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, Cory Booker, people, Sean Casten, who are really rising to this moment. People who are, whether it's in a hearing or whether it's on the Capitol steps or whether it's in a town hall, are really talking about what needs to happen and pointing out the absurdity of what is happening. People who we can really rally around. Greg Casar, who is a congressperson representing parts of Austin, Texas. He is a Democrat. He's one of those people. Maybe we should call it Casar and Crockett's Corner. I don't know. There was recently a hearing called by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah, where they were supposed to be talking about government efficiency. And I'm sure you have heard of the Doge Boys' plan to get rid of NPR, National Public Radio, PBS, Public Broadcasting System. It's been referred to as the war on Sesame Street. And Mr. Rogers. As part of this hearing to discuss these measures, Mr. Casar talked about how Republicans really aren't fooling anybody. You know, they can talk about not spending money on public broadcasting, but what difference does that hearing make if you're not even going to call Elon Musk to testify? Elon Musk with his Doge bros, huh? Somebody called them, I can't remember who, somebody referred to them as his muskrats, which is even better. You know, let's focus on Sesame Street and how much government money goes to Sesame Street. Let's not ask Elon Musk to testify. Let's not look at the nonsense that's coming out of Republican mouths. Let's try to pretend that it all makes sense. Recently, there was a hearing. And Greg Casar basically said, why aren't we talking to Elon Musk? Instead, we're sitting here, we're talking about Elmo, and this is the good use of our time, and this is the way our government is supposed to be functioning. Thank you, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Anyway, I thought he was awesome. And I want to share just a little bit about what he said in that committee meeting. Listen to this.
Questions for me. How many millions of dollars a month do taxpayers spend for Daniel Tiger to play golf?
I have no idea.
The answer is none. Okay. To your knowledge, has Miss Piggy ever been caught trying to funnel billions of dollars in government contracts to herself and to her companies?
That's a silly question.
The answer is no. How about Arthur the Aardvark? Has he ever fired independent government watchdogs who are investigating his companies? The answer is no. Madam Chair, I'm told we're here to talk about government efficiency, but Daniel Tiger has not blown $10 million of taxpayer money to play golf with his friends. but Donald Trump has, just at the beginning of his administration. Miss Piggy hasn't been caught funneling billions of dollars in government contracts to herself, but Elon Musk has. And Arthur has not fired independent government watchdogs investigating him and his companies. But Elon Musk has fired at least 5. So once again, my Republican colleagues are dragging in a scapegoat, this time PBS and NPR, to try to distract from the fact that Trump and Musk are robbing working people. It's Sesame Street that's making things expensive. It's Mr. Rogers that's blowing taxpayer money. It's listeners like you. It's absurd. The total funding for public broadcasting is just 1/6 the amount that Elon Musk's companies make off of the government every single year. But you will not see Elon Musk being grilled by this committee. I've seen a lot, but pointing the finger at Elmo to cover for Elon Musk might be a new low for Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene's committee. I don't think Americans are buying it.
Daniel Tiger. Oh, no. You know, isn't it interesting when a Democrat actually points out the absurdity of what's going on? Excuse me, how much money has Daniel Tiger spent to play golf? And you can see when he asks the witness for the first one, they don't understand that it's a character from Sesame Street. They think he's talking about a real ball. I'm sorry, I really don't know. I really don't know. But that's where we are. Hey, there's one more thing, too. I told you Senator Elizabeth Warren was on with Jen Psaki last night. They talked about tariffs. She also talked about a warning that Mark Cuban has put out. You know, I told you about the interview Rahm Emanuel did with Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart says to him, who do you see coming out of the wilderness for the Democrats to lead us to victory in 2028? And Jon Stewart said, give me 3 names. And Rahm says, I can give you 6. And really what Rahm started to do before Jon Stewart sidetracked him was talk about prominent Democratic governors. He feels that if you've got a governor, you've got somebody who's got a lot of experience governing. They have that great political resume, plus they can bring an outsider's perspective. And, you know, remember Bill Clinton was a governor. Jimmy Carter was a governor. It is sometimes where we get some of our best presidents. Anyway, Jon Stewart asked him, well, do you think Mark Cuban would be a good president? He said no. You know, he said he doesn't have the political experience. And, you know, you need to have political experience to do well in that job. Anyway, Senator Elizabeth Warren was also talking about Mark Cuban last night. Listen to this.
I was thinking of you today and was so grateful you were able to come on because and I just read this, but Mark Cuban posted this today. He said, if the new tariffs stay in place for multiple years and are enforced and inflationary, and DOGE continues to cut and fire, which is also having an impact on the economy, we will be in a far worse situation than 2008. Yeah. I mean, I think I first met you when you were one of the loudest and boldest voices during that period of time. Do you feel that way, too?
You know, I am very worried, and I'm worried because these tariffs are coming in, exactly like Cuban points out, at a time when the economy has already absorbed one body blow after another. Look at all the people around the country that have already been fired by DOGE or who are afraid that when they show up tomorrow for work, they're going to be thrown out. Look at all the cuts, for example, to our medical research and scientific research. So all those contracts are being pulled back. Cuts that are going into our public schools, which means little towns across Massachusetts and big cities saying, wait a minute, we're not going to be able to hold our budgets together here. So who do we lay off? How do we manage to keep these pieces going? All of this occurring at the same moment that Donald Trump just comes in and declares that he's going to turn over the economy on top of small businesses that are already pushed tight to the edge, on top of lots of people already losing their jobs. That just magnifies the problem we've got here.
And Jen Psaki is right. Elizabeth Warren has been, like Bernie Sanders, apparently able to read the future. They've been warning us for a long time about what was happening or what could happen, and now it is. Guess we should have listened, huh? Maybe listened a little better? Well, we're listening now. We are going to take a break for news, and we are going to be back with much more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm pleased to be joined by John Nichols, National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation magazine, also author, co-author, or editor of more than a dozen books on media, democracy, American political history. And, John, that's all the bio you get because we need to have time to talk.
Well, we better. And I'm always a little embarrassed when people go through the whole bio because, it's certainly my mother appreciates it greatly, but I think everybody else could stand with a little less.
Wow. Well, Mom, I've already let my audience know how accomplished your son is. Please forgive me for not going into granular detail on his resume, but I really want to get to having him talk about some of the articles that he has written lately. I think my favorite is Trump's tantrum tariffs. I love that. May I borrow that, John, and refer to them as tantrum tariffs?
If you don't, I'm going to be very disappointed. Yeah. I mean, I will tell you, I do believe it's a pretty good description. Well thought out, I guess, for what he's doing. This is a tantrum. It's not about economics, right? I mean, half the time he's going after countries. He doesn't even talk about economics. He's talking about, all sorts of other issues, all sorts of things he doesn't like about political relationships with other places. Seems to think that Canada is a huge source of drugs, which I have news for you, it's not.
I think that part of it. Approach. I think part of the tantrum is he wants. He's all about revenge and retribution, so he wants to punish everybody. But I suspect he also thinks that putting these tariffs makes him look like a tough guy, makes him look strong. But to Canada, maybe if you're going to put a tariff on, China, maybe you can make an argument that you're going to go tough on an adversary. But Canada?
Yeah, look, the fact of the matter is that Canada has been, it's a very proud country, but it's also been our great loyal ally for a very, very long time. When there's something tough that we get ourselves into, it's usually Canada that steps up first to say, we'll back you up. And there's been no change in that sentiment for the Canadians. The Canadians have expressed no disdain for America, at least not until the tariffs came along. They are incredibly good allies to the United States. And they're also a country that has its own distinctive character. It's like the U.S. It has, great presence in the Arctic, and the Arctic is the region of the future, whether you like it or not. The Arctic and Africa are really, in many ways, the two regions of the future. And so these are places, this is a country which we should have an especially close relationship, but Trump has blown it up. In fact, he's blown it up to such an extent that he has literally changed the politics of Canada.
Canada has had a liberal. Their party in the center left is called the Liberals, and they have had a liberal government now for a while under Justin Trudeau. And I don't have to tell you, over time, people get tired of governments, and they tend to want to look for something else. That's the nature of politics. And so the trend in Canada was against Trudeau to the point where he chose not to seek another term as prime minister. But what's fascinating about this circumstance is since Trump moved the tariffs in, we have ended up in a situation where now it looks very much like Canada may elect another liberal government because the people are literally afraid to elect a government that might bend down to Donald Trump, that being the more conservative party. And so, I mean, he's literally changing the politics of the world, but he's not changing the politics of the world to like America more or to want to work more closely with America on critical issues. He's changing it in a way that forces countries like Canada to start to look at possible relationships with Europe or with Asia, to really kind of restructure how they relate to the world. And nothing of that is good for America.
And my fear is that those shifting relationships are going to permanently exclude us because, how is anybody supposed to trust us? The first time we elected this guy, you could have said it was a quirk of the Electoral College. Maybe people were rebelling because they didn't like Hillary Clinton. But the second time was a deliberate choice. There were millions of people in this country who voted for chaos. I think they got more chaos than they were expecting, but, it was a matter of degree, not whether or not this was what they wanted. And I don't see how the rest of the world, even if we can find a reasonable Democrat who can, turn this cruise ship around, I don't see how the rest of the world will ever trust us the way they did in the past. Do you?
Look, things change rapidly. The world is a complex place, and so you can't say for sure that things are going to take you one way or the other, right? We don't know. But what we have to anticipate is the prospect that the rest of the world will move on without us. And we've kind of seeded the ground for this in some very dangerous and I think very troublesome ways. I'll give you an example. Back in 2003, the whole world was basically saying, look, don't go to war with Iraq. Try and negotiate this thing out, try and figure out how we can avoid violence and maybe dial things down. This is not to say that anybody thought that Saddam Hussein was a good player. It's also not to say that things might have ultimately evolved toward a conflict. But George W. Bush went into that conflict before he needed to do so. It got America locked down in a mess on the other side of the world in a way that basically destabilized our position among the countries of the world for many, many years, right? It was a very troublesome thing. At the same time, China said, okay, we're not going to get involved in, trying to overturn governments in the Middle East and things like that. We're going to go invest in Africa. We're going to go invest in Southern Asia. We're going to build out this Silk Road, this concept of, a relationship between the Chinese manufacturing sector and new markets around the world. It was a kind of, historians already do and will continue to write about it as a sort of an epic economic strategy, right? So that's what the Chinese did. That set America back. Now, when we finally kind of got our head together as regards Iraq and some other parts of the world, America was able to, build on long-term relationships and come back to a place of relative stability. Now you have Trump kind of blowing it up again, right? Pulling the United States out of the international community, creating a situation where everybody around the world basically says, look, we're not sure we can trust them. We're not sure we can work with them. We're not even sure what they're thinking, and it's very destructive. At a certain point, when this keeps happening, right, where the United States keeps putting itself in a position where, despite the fact that it is a very well-regarded country in many, many ways, but when it puts itself in these positions where people have to question their relationship with the U.S., you ultimately end up in a situation where new relationships are built, right? And this couldn't come at a worse time, by the way, because we are in a moment of automation, of robotification, of AI technology, of shifting trade policies and patterns. And, if there was ever a time when the U.S. should be working closely with countries around the world to try and, create the future that's going to work, this is it. Instead, we're going to the sidelines, right? We're pulling out of that. And I don't think there's any question now that leaders in places like Germany and Scandinavia, who historically were very, very tied to the U.S. and historically have, seen the U.S. as a market and a place and an ally, even when they disagreed, but a place that they could work with. Canada is another example. These places are going to be looking around the world for different relationships, right? For countries that they can have stable relationships with. And, boy, if the U.S. is marginalized in that situation, if we're not in the center of that, we'll always have military power. But, boy, if we don't have the power, the economic and the social, what's referred to as the soft power, to operate in that world, it's going to be bad for us economically. It's going to be bad for us politically. And frankly, ultimately, it'll be bad for us from a standpoint of global stability and how we fit into a stable world.
There's a Canadian I follow on social media who recently took his camera on a tour of his big grocery store. And he showed an aisle, and then he looked at the camera and he said, "This aisle used to be all stuff from the USA. There isn't anything here from the United States now." And I know there was that big chain in Canada that, just as a point of information, put a big red maple leaf on anything they sold that was made in Canada. And he walked down another aisle, and it was maple leaf after maple leaf after maple leaf. And he concluded this post by saying that, in the future, down the road, maybe when Trump is gone, he said, we're not going to hate the United States. We're not going to love the United States. He said, it's going to be probably the worst thing possible for the United States. We are going to consider you irrelevant.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, that's the toughest of all possible scenarios. And again, I don't know that that's where we're going to end up.
Well, we still have time, I think, to pull this out of the fire, but I don't see any indicators that that's going to happen.
No, and I mean, that's, look, at this point, truthfully, most Americans aren't thinking about our relations with the rest of the world. Most Americans are thinking about whether they're going to have to retire 5 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the instability of the stock market. It's up a little, down a little, down a lot, up a little, is creating an incredible anxiety. And once we stabilized, and, look, we're either going to stabilize quickly or there is going to be a pushback against Trump that comes not just from Democrats, but will start to come from at least some Republicans. And I know that's only a handful, but remember, the House and Senate are very closely divided. So even a handful of Republicans splitting from Trump will ultimately begin to stall this out. So it's either going to come, at his behest, or it's going to come at the behest of the broader political governance community. And so, yeah, we'll come back a little bit from this, but the problem is that we won't be trusted, right?
Yeah.
There's an instability. It's bizarre. I do, now and again, I'll do MSNBC and some of these other cable channels, and often we'll talk about the tariff stuff. And it's a bizarre situation. You'll be on one day saying, boy, Trump just did something that's incredibly destructive, incredibly wrong-headed. And then the next day, he will have pulled it back, right?
and say, well, okay, well, Trump did something good here. He figured out that was a bad idea. And then a week later, he goes back to the initial position, or in this case, what we're seeing this week, goes dramatically beyond the initial position to a place where, there really is an instability. And I just think that ultimately for the United States, it's a little bit like in our relations with people, right? If you have a friend or somebody who's just always in crisis, right? And I don't mean crisis where you would help them, but I mean just always kind of creating some sort of new instability, some sort of new problem. Eventually, that wears you out. You know what I mean?
Yes, it does.
You get tired of it. You get tired of the drama. My daughter talks about, she doesn't want to be around too much drama. Well, right now, the Trump administration is making the United States drama, and frankly, a lot of people in the U.S. and around the world would like to just, have something more stable. So anyway, we're at a critical juncture. We're at a very chaotic moment. I think it will change the politics of the United States, just as economic crises, and we are in an economic crisis. Economic crises of this kind have in the past. There's no question you wouldn't have gotten a New Deal without Hoover's disastrous handling of the initial stages of the Great Depression. Similarly, the great Democratic rise in the late 1950s into the 1960s, which gave you strong Democratic control of Congress, then President Kennedy, then President Johnson, came after the 1957-1958 downturn. And you can just kind of keep going through history. It doesn't always go to the Democrats. I mean, when Jimmy Carter was presiding over a very, very tough time in our economy that saw a lot of inflation, a lot of challenges, that's how Ronald Reagan came in. But the thing is that when you have moments like this, the people will choose something else.
Yeah.
And in this case, Donald Trump and the Republicans are not in a very good place politically.
Let's hope so. John, you were just making reference to history. I know a couple of articles you've written recently focused on people who I don't know. Tony Benn, you wrote about. Robert McChesney. We need to take a real quick break. I want you to teach me about both of those people and why you think they're important when we come right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
John Nichols is the national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. He's written a couple of articles in the last month or two about people who I had never heard of. One is Tony Benn from the UK, and the other is Robert McChesney. Never heard of either of these. Tell me about them, please. You obviously felt they were important enough to write entire articles on them. Educate me, John.
Well, you've educated me so many times, Joan. I will try and try to return some of the favor. We'll start with Tony Benn. Tony Benn was the longest-serving Labour Party member of Parliament in Great Britain. He served from the end of World War II, basically, until the 21st century, and was a remarkable figure. He's basically the leader of the left in the UK. Best understood as, in many ways, the UK's Bernie Sanders. Although he was in a leadership role for a lot longer and was very, very close to the unions, really took on and battled Margaret Thatcher in the stages where Thatcher was really undermining the working class in England in a lot of ways. And the thing that caused me to write about Ben is that Ben was in government, and he was also in opposition, during some very unstable times historically. And he was a very philosophical figure. He had an excellent skill for kind of getting to the heart of the matter and kind of moving away from some of the momentary politics of a particular era into sort of the deeper questions that people should face about oligarchy, about concentrated wealth, about that intersection of wealth and power that we see occurring now in Washington with Musk and Trump. And so I wanted to write about him, and we had the convenient reality that a week or so ago was the 100th anniversary of his birth. And so I took some time to write. And what was striking about it was how many people responded. And I think there are a tremendous number of people who are looking for kind of North Star figures and folks who might be able to give them a little bit of insight, a little understanding. And the thing that Ben always said was that you could ask anybody in power a handful of questions. You know, what power do you have? How did you get it? How do we regulate you? How do we make sure you don't abuse it? And how do we get rid of you? You know, if we don't like what you're doing, how do we get rid of you? And basically he said, if someone in power can't answer those questions for you and doesn't do so honestly, they're a danger to you. They're a threat to you because ultimately they want to use their power for their own ends. Right? They're not there to serve you or anything like that. So his way of taking apart some of these fundamental issues was particularly appealing, and I knew him for many years in the UK and always had a great deal of a very high regard for him. And then on Bob McChesney, Bob McChesney was my co-author for 6 of the books that I wrote about media and democracy, or I should really say, if I'm honest, 6 of the books that he wrote about media and democracy and allowed me to be a participant. He was a brilliant thinker on media issues, really one of the most profoundly insightful people as regards, you know, just all sorts of questions as regards ownership of media, concentration of media power, the challenges that we face with the rise of a digital age in which we are increasingly at the behest, at the disadvantage with very, very wealthy people who are buying up our communications platforms. And, you know, this is the tech bros of Silicon Valley, the Elon Musks and others. And we've ended up in a situation, and Bob was the great thinker on illustrating this idea. We've ended up in a situation where our daily newspapers are collapsing all over the United States, where many of our traditional media systems are in deep decay, where we are losing journalists on a daily basis. We've lost tens of thousands of journalists over the last 20 years, and we just don't. They don't come back. We have fewer people doing journalism today than at any time in the modern era in the United States. Doesn't mean there aren't a lot of great people doing it, heroic people doing it, many of them doing it online. But online journalism has never replaced the big newsrooms of the past, the competing publications, the competing radio stations with big news operations, things of that nature. And so what Bob taught, and I think it's very relevant to this moment, is that when you take apart existing media, right, when you collapse existing media, you create a situation where there's a void, right? People are not getting good information based on facts, based on ideas that they can use to help to sort through stuff and frankly, make democracy work. And this is a big, big deal because when you create such a void, it's not filled by another news operation today. It's filled by propaganda. It's filled by self-serving political interventions that don't seek to inform people, but that seek to kind of warp the process in the favor, usually of very wealthy, very powerful folks. And so Bob McChesney was a great thinker on these issues and really the person, both at domestic level and internationally, who helped a lot of us to understand how to think about media and democracy.
I want to talk to you. I actually do a monthly media segment where I'm joined by 2 longstanding Chicago journalists, and we talk about not so much the news of the day, but how the news of the day is being reported, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to talk more. We have to take a break. I'm speaking to John Nichols, who writes for The Nation. We're going to continue this right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me is John Nichols. He writes for The Nation magazine. He wrote an article on Robert McChesney, Bob McChesney, when he passed away. The 2 of them worked together on several of their books. And Bob was a great observer of media, but so are you, John. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you didn't think that online news sources would attract the same kind of audience or have the same gravitas as perhaps legacy media. And, you know, there are certainly wackadoodle newsletters online, but there are also people, I'm thinking of Katie Couric, Mehdi Hassan, who started Zedio. There are people who are trying to build online news into a more viable source for news. And I think probably my generation isn't really going to be thoroughly embracing these other platforms, but I think the younger audience is. I mean, YouTube is a huge source of both information and entertainment for my adult children. And do you think that while right now maybe the audiences are a bit smaller, that could be the wave of the future?
Well, it has to be, right? And I want to be, you know, when I talk about the value of what we refer to as legacy media, it's not because I want to go back to it per se, or that I think it was always right, because it wasn't. I mean, legacy media got a lot wrong. And I think we have to have that perspective, that understanding that there wasn't a golden age in the past that we want to return to. But what we do want to have is that level of journalism, the number of people going out and covering things. Now, you mentioned some people who are doing brilliant work online. And I'll tell you, I started blogging back in the 1990s. And so I've been, very involved primarily doing my writing online.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
For the better part of 30 years. I've done a lot of YouTube, but it's usually interviews with other people. But what I will tell you is, and done podcasts and all sorts of other things. So using all these platforms and very much respecting them, but there just aren't enough of us. And this is the big deal. When you mentioned Mehdi, who is a friend and who does incredibly important work and has just shown the tremendous capacity of the digital sphere for creating a whole bunch of journalism and a lot of interventions that are really necessary. But that's at the global level. That's at the international level. Where we need a tremendous amount of journalism right now is at the local and regional level. And it's just, that void is not being filled at the level that we need. There have to be people out covering school board meetings, covering city council and village board meetings, covering the whole of our political life and our governing life. If there isn't, we're going to have broad sectors that are not accountable. And this is a big deal because with that lack of accountability at the local level, right, that lack of even when people are doing a good job, just that lack of information, it becomes easier and easier for those who attack government, those who criticize government, to say, you don't need government, or it's what does it even do? It costs us money, but it doesn't do anything. And journalism helps us to make sure that government reflects our needs, our wants, our desires, our goals, and also tells us when it is doing that and when it fails to do that. If we have insufficient journalism, we end up in a situation where, our politics and even our governance becomes warped. And I think that what we're seeing now with Elon Musk and with Donald Trump is a play out of that, right? They have filled the void, if you will, with lies, just fantasies. I mean, think of the things that Musk and others have been saying about Social Security. They're wild claims about, 300-year-olds and things like that. It's just terrible misinformation, right? And there's a tremendous lack of perspective there. And yet they've been heard quite loudly. And everybody has a right to express their opinion. Everybody has a right to go out and, make their statement. But we end up in a situation now with insufficient journalism, in my view, where a billionaire is far more likely to be heard at a very high volume than the average working person or than a million average working people. And result is that our policies begin to get warped by the fact that the billionaire class is able to, not to bring information into the discourse, but to actually bring, lies, fantasies into the discourse. And that does, I think that does create a challenge. Now, my goal is never to silence people. I don't want to say, oh, you can't have your opinion or you can't make your statement. That's not what I want. What I want is enough journalism of a high enough quality done by diverse people from all sorts of different backgrounds with all sorts of different perspectives that we cut through the lies. We get beyond the fantasies toward a place of reality, right? Of something, or at the very least, something that we can all agree on, or perhaps even, maybe we won't all agree, but at least we'll
give us your recommendations. Other than The Nation magazine, what are, say, 3 or 4 really trusted information sources, whether it's local or regional or national, that you turn to when you are looking for information?
Well, I often turn to you, Joan. So let's start right here. And it's often local radio and people who go out and do the very hard work of reporting, as you do. But I think on the, again, we're going up into that global perspective. I think you talk about publications like The Guardian out of the United Kingdom, which does a tremendous job of covering a lot of global issues, as well as they have a significant U.S. operation. And so they cover quite a bit of what's happening in the U.S. I think they do a good job. I think that you can look at a program like Democracy Now! That Amy Goodman does, which is a real speak truth to power program, and I think asks a lot of tough questions and gets to the heart of the matter, covers a lot of places in the world that otherwise wouldn't be covered, and a lot of places in the U.S., and I think they just do a tremendous job. And then I will tell you, the truth of the matter is that there are still great journalists, fantastic journalists, working for the New York Times, even if you still holding out at the Washington Post, despite everything Jeff Bezos has done of late, and in other publications. So I don't want to beat people up.
I agree with you on The Guardian. I subscribe to The Guardian U.S. I got rid of my New York Times subscription a while ago, not necessarily because of the work of their journalists, but their headline writers made me wanted to beat my head against a wall, and I couldn't take it anymore. And then the Washington Post, I do believe there are still some decent reporters there, but Jeff Bezos has made it so clear that he wants certain kinds of editorials, and he wants these topics covered. And I hung in there for the first Bezos attack and then the second Bezos attack. And when it came to the third time Bezos was weighing in on what would and wouldn't be in the Post, I started to worry that it had reached a point, his clear desires had reached a point where it couldn't help but influence the newsroom. Not necessarily somebody's going to do biased reporting, but as you well know, the stories that reporters are assigned can be the first level of showing favoritism or not favoritism. Oh, we think this is important, but we're not going to cover that. I started to worry that there was not going to continue to be the unbiased. I mean, come on. This was the newspaper that started counting Donald Trump's lies in his first administration. You think they're going to do that now? Because I don't. And I finally let it go. I mean, if you don't feel like you can really trust that you're getting an unvarnished perspective, what's the point? Too many other places I can spend my money.
And I think you get to the heart of the matter, right? When Bezos came along and suggested that the editorial pages of the Washington Post were going to basically jettison any kind of rational perspective and promote, a vision of so-called free markets, which is really a vision of how somebody like Jeff Bezos gets a whole lot richer. When he said that, I think he did tremendous damage to the credibility of a great American newspaper. And I think I wrote about it. Other people did. I think a lot of Americans said, look, I can't trust this place. I can't feel comfortable with that. And whether that's right or wrong isn't the point, right? Because when you cross that line, you don't get people back, right? You don't, kind of renew the franchise. And so I think Bezos did tremendous damage there. I know people who work for the Post. I know people who work for the Times. I know people who work for a number of these publications, which I criticize the publications, but I still respect the sincere efforts of the journalists to try and do a good job. And I guess that's the deeper thing, Joan. When we talk about media and democracy, when we talk about journalism and democracy, at the heart of the matter, there's kind of two levels here. The first level is, do we have a sufficient amount of journalism to sustain democracy, right? To make sure that our democratic experiment works, our small d democratic experiment works. If we don't have a sufficient amount of journalism, then we've got to respond in some way. We've got to, figure out how to get it. And that's more public media, more support for independent local media, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first level of it, and that's sort of the macro. At the micro level, I think one of the most important things we can do is identify the journalists we trust. Find the people that we do believe are doing a good job. Some of them may be working for publications or broadcast outlets that we don't necessarily love, right? But we know that individuals do a very, very good job. And then those are the two kind of core levels. The final thing coming out of that is increasingly we have to support and make media that serves us, right, that serves democracy. And that's one of the things that this radio station does. It says this is a very, very special and unique radio station, a big city station that seeks to bring a progressive perspective to the discourse. And it's one that I think is incredibly valuable and also worthy of being supported, worthy of being encouraged. And there may be folks who hear something, I can't imagine it, but might hear something they disagree with on this station, but you don't toss it all out because of that, right? You recognize that if we're to have a functional democracy, we've got to get information from a lot of places, and it is getting harder. That's the bottom line. It's getting harder at kind of every level to get the journalism that we need.
Well, I have pulled Mr. Nichols far afield in this discussion. I did want to focus on his writings for the nation, but then I realized I wanted his comments on the larger world around us. So, Mr. Nichols, you're going to have to come back so we can have a better talk about your writing, okay?
Well, I'm honored to be on, and I'm especially honored to be on at time of day when few people might be heading home and listening to the radio, which is kind of what radio is all about. The genius of radio is a place that you can take it with you, right? You can have it with you in the car. You can have it with you when you're doing something. Most other media doesn't work like that, not quite in that same way. So I'm always excited to be a part of, especially a good, smart radio show like yours.
Well, I appreciate that, though. I'm beginning to think that a majority of our listeners listen to either a TuneIn Radio app or they listen on their computer, because when I get calls, maybe it's Trump's got people fired up. I'm starting to get callers from literally coast to coast. But as you may know, a lot of new cars do not come with AM radios, which is a travesty, but we'll talk about that another day. Yeah. John Nichols, The Nation magazine, you should subscribe. He does some great, great stuff. We are going to take a break, and we're going to be back with Rich Eberwine from Heartland Signal after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Rich Eberwine is a reporter for Heartland Signal, the digital cousin of WCPT AM radio. And weekly, Rich joins us to share 3 Heartland Signal stories that we might otherwise have missed. Rich, thank you so much for being here. What have you got for us today?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with Michigan. There's been an announcement for a candidate running in the Michigan gubernatorial race. Representative John James has announced his run for governor. He's been a staunch ally of Trump for a few years. Trump endorsed his failed Senate runs in 2018 and 2020, as well as his congressional campaigns in 22 and 24. So James has been kind of ducking, one of the many Republicans ducking town hall events and hosting town hall events in recent weeks, prompting backlash from his constituents in a swing district. He represents a very competitive district over in Michigan, seen as a vulnerable Republican. And in the past, he's supported repealing the Affordable Care Act, defunding Planned Parenthood, and he's also taken money from the Michigan fake electors who, of course, attempted to overturn the state's 2020 election results for Trump a few years back. And so we reported on that today, and that story should be going out. And Detroit News reporter Craig Mauger pointed out that on X that James may have already broken the law by announcing his gubernatorial campaign on his congressional campaign website, even though the gubernatorial campaign adheres to state law instead of federal law. So already sparking controversy, and in addition to avoiding his constituents at town halls. So getting off to a good start over there in Michigan.
Yeah, really, Mr. Popular. Michigan is such an interesting state, and along those lines, I was reading recently that Michigan is one of the states that is going to be particularly hard hit by the tariffs. I wonder what he'll do about that. Yeah,
he has not, has not publicly denounced the tariffs. In fact, yesterday when he made his announcement, he said that him and President Trump have been in each other's corners through thick and thin for 8 years, and there is no reason to end it now. So he said that he is looking to make Michigan great again, just like Trump is making America great.
Wow, making Michigan great again. You know, silly me, I thought it was pretty great before, but what do I know?
He joins an interesting cast of characters running for governor in Michigan too. William Knoll is one of them, who was criminally charged but later acquitted for his connections to the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. So he's going to be joining the race, as well as a man named Anthony Hudson, who we've reported on in the past for many a controversial thing. Should be an eventful primary over in Michigan for sure.
I think one of the Democrats, Jocelyn Benson, I think I've interviewed her before. I think she was pretty impressive. She's the Secretary of State now, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So I think the two front runners on the Democratic side are Jocelyn Benson and the current Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. Definitely going to need to keep an eye on that, because Gretchen Whitmer is ineligible to run for re-election because of term limits. So the open race there, and definitely one that the Democrats are going to be looking to keep, obviously.
Oh, I hope so. Gosh, I hope so. And you've got some sound. I believe your next story is front of one of my personal favorite legislators, a real man of the people. If your people are, I don't know, Elon Musk. Talk about this.
Yeah, so we got Representative Scott Perry over in Pennsylvania. He held a teletown hall, not an in-person town hall. I guess that's something, though. He at least held one. And during this town hall, he was confronted by a constituent on asking him what he was going to do about her prescription drug prices increasing. And if there was a plan in Congress that he was planning on opposing these price hikes, and he had a really interesting response that we have some audio of.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more, and I hope that even though some people might not want it to happen, I hope that DOJ does look into that, but it doesn't absolve us as members of Congress and as congressional committees to look into it as well, because I think it is these things are often abused. And I don't want to just be a guy that picks on Big Pharma for it, because, Big Pharma does a lot of good things for our country, in providing cures and the medicines that do make and help people get through their daily lives. But the costs are often prohibitive.
Well, he's right about that.
Yeah. So, it came to the defense of Big Pharma when the constituent, the full version of that is on his website, the Teletown Hall, but she was almost in tears because the price of one of her prescriptions was 100 times higher than it was under the Biden administration. So that was his defense.
The empathy coming from these guys is pretty staggering. They're just so empathetic. They really feel people's pain, and you can tell it really matters.
Yeah. So in my report, we included some links to, Perry has been linked to some big pharma dark money groups who donated at least a couple $100,000 to his 2020 election. So he definitely relies on that kind of money in such every cycle. He's projected to be like one of the most competitive races, defending his seat over there in Pennsylvania. So he definitely relies on this kind of dark money from Big Pharma. Not surprising that he is not quick to criticize the industry. But yeah, he's obviously another very loyal supporter of Donald Trump. He was involved in the 2020 election denialism as well, and former chair of the Freedom Caucus, Scott Perry. So another great dude to keep an eye on as he's looking to keep his seat and skirt his way around to the unpopular administration moves right now.
So unless anyone think you're a misogynist, you are an equal opportunity reporter. There are also women who you have brought under the microscope. Tell us about this Republican rep from Iowa.
Yeah, so this had something to do with one of your favorite stories in recent weeks, the Signal group chat leak. Marionette Miller Meeks, she's an Iowa representative. During an interview, she suggested that some members of the Trump administration may have wanted the war plans having to do with the Yemen strikes to leak to the public, and we have her discussing this idea in a clip.
The other thing is, and I think you mentioned something, we think now, first of all, we didn't know if it was somebody from within the administration that wanted to hurt the Trump administration. We certainly saw that in the first term of his presidency.
I would not be shocked if that turns out to be it. I would not be shocked at all.
Yeah. And then secondly, could this have been a strategy through their conversations, national security, Michael Waltz and Secretary Hegseth, that they wanted the information to be leaked, because sometimes you want information to be leaked.
Okay, so we went from nothing happened. Well, something happened, but it's not our fault. Well, something happened, and it might have been our fault, but it wasn't a big deal. And now it's like, oh, we did it on purpose.
It's baffling, right? Like the stages that this story has gone through. Leaking sensitive information like that would be unbelievable, first of all. But just the way that these guys have talked about it is, Secretary Hegseth has denied that these were even war plans.
Oh God,
it's unbelievable. Unreal
I'm
story.
sorry you have to wade through all this stuff that the Republican Party is doing and spouting. And I hope you do something fun tonight to kind of cleanse your palate, Rich.
Cubs game. We watching the Cubs game.
Oh, okay. All right.
Need some baseball in my life.
There you go. Rich Eberwein from Heartland Signal, bringing us 3 stories that they have had on the website, heartlandsignal.com. Rich, thank you as always.
Thank you, Joan. I'll talk to you next time.
Yes. That's going to do it for me. Patty has a cool guest tonight. Wendell Robinson, Executive Director of Restore Justice Illinois. That's going to be some good stuff. I've got a couple of fun people tomorrow. David Orr is going to be back, and Suzanne Chod from North Central College, and John Lothian, who writes a very interesting business newsletter. It's going to be a great day all around. Remember, Richard Chu kicks our day off at 6 a.m. Have a great evening, my friends. Find something that brings you joy. Good night.